Hey guys, welcome to my grandma's basement. This is actually where me and Casey's right back here. What's up, bud? This is where we actually do a lot of our editing and where we get all of our stuff done for Logan Daddy Photo. And by popular request, this tutorial is going to be all about the tone curve. So let's jump into Lightroom and start taking a look around. Today we're going to be taking a look at this image of Cameron. Cameron was one of the models that David Beckham Photography did high school senior photos for, and she came up and did some photos with us, and it was a really good time. So if we take a look at this image, you can see there's a lot of different tones going on here. There's some midtones going on in the background here. There's some highlights going on even further back. And then there's some really dark tones in her leggings and then in her outfit because it's black, obviously. I really picked this image to use because it's got a really soft and natural skin tone. I really like how this turned out. So when you open Lightroom and you take a look at the tone curve module, this is about what it will look like if you've never adjusted the tone curve before. It'll look like highlights, lights, darks, and shadow sliders. This is actually something that's a little bit confusing because it really has a lot of confusion with this area up in the top, which is also highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. And so we're not going to use these sliders at all. What we're going to do is click on the point curve and actually adjust our tone curve manually. So the thing to know about the tone curve is that it affects the histogram, and it does so in a way that is so much different than sliders. Let me show you. So the histogram is actually shown on the tone curve in that module right behind it here. You can see those peaks and valleys that are in direct correlation with the histogram that's up top here. And as we move some of these points, we're just going to focus on the two that are already here. This point and this point. This is the highlights and this is the shadows. The left-hand side of the image is going to be your shadows. The right-hand side is the highlights. Don't worry so much about the vertical aspect of these. I just want you to focus on what's going to happen to the histogram up top as we make these adjustments. So if I take this point at the bottom and I move it up, you can see that it'll move the tones all the way to the right, so it's making them lighter. But it does not affect the peaks and the valleys that are on this image. So let's take that back down, and you can see that if I did the same kind of thing with the black slider, that I would slide this up, but it's really starting to affect the way that the shadows peak looked before. It's just taking that tone and just pushing it way out of the way. What this one does instead is move the tones into a new value. It actually changes the way that your raw converter reads the file. Let's take our blacks back down to 0. And if we take our blacks and we move it the other direction, what you'll see is that it starts to move the histogram in the other direction. So it starts to make things darker. It starts to move everything in the other direction. So now we have parts of the image that are completely underexposed. This is so important to know because you need to know what areas of the image you're affecting whenever you use your tone curve. Same with the highlights. If we take this point right here and we move it down, we're taking the highlight values and pushing them into a different value. So in this case, we're taking 100% value and changing it to 84%. And you can see it will affect the rest of the image as you go down. If we take it the other direction, we're going to start to take those highlights even brighter. So now you can see that we have overexposed parts of the image whenever we highlight on our highlight clipping right here. Most of the time, whenever I adjust a tone curve, I'm just doing a basic S-curve. And then from there, I start to tweak it and figure out exactly where I want the image to go. So what I mean by an S-curve is just that, making a simple S figure with your curve. It's raising the value of the midtones or the highlights and lowering the values of the shadows or the blacks. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's grab a point and let's move it up. And you can see it's getting almost that kind of washed out, faded look. But by taking another point and clicking and dragging down, we're creating contrast. So without using our contrast slider at all, we have now pushed the histogram further to the right and further to the left. So now that we've added a lot of contrast to our image in a way that is holistic across the entire image, not just by using one little slider, we can then go up into the basic modules, into the basic sliders, and start to adjust the image on a greater level of detail. So in this image in particular, I feel like that this is still a little dark, even though that's what I've chosen to do here in my tone curve. If I start to raise my shadows right here, you can see that now there is a much greater high contrast and detail that comes out of the bottoms of her outfit. If I do the same thing with the highlights and kind of pull down those highlights, I'm able to preserve a lot of the highlights that were in the walls and inside of the sky back up here. One thing that the tone curve does that is kind of counterintuitive is that it will actually start to give your image a lot more saturation. So you'll notice on a lot of my images, I do decrease the saturation quite a bit to just preserve the original color that was in the image. So this is our before and this is after. We've added so much contrast to this image without even adjusting a contrast slider. And then we've recovered a lot of those details. I do want to show you guys one more thing along with this. If we feel like this point that we've placed here is a little on the brighter side, which you can see it's affecting a lot of this peak that's right here on the histogram, we can take this point and just move it a little bit lower. What this will do is it'll start to change the tonal value of those highlights and allow them to come down a little bit lower. Again, we've moved it from this top point up here to a little bit lower. This curve is going to be affected in multiple areas depending on how many points you put on the curve. So if I put another one right here in the middle, you can see that as I move it, it's going to adjust accordingly across the image and create something that isn't very pleasing. So I choose to typically go with 2 points, or if I need to, I will add a third and just move it very, very lightly in one way or another, but keep it very close to the dotted line that is here to not affect the other parts of the image that I don't want to see changed. All right, guys, thanks so much for checking out this video. I hope that gives you a little insight to the tone curve and how to use it to create dynamic contrast without being all confused by points and sliders and everything else. So check me out on social media. This is something you're into. Let me know if you like this video. Comment, like, subscribe, and oh yeah, this doesn't work on JPEGs. Peace.